What if the last thing you never said is the only thing someone needed to hear? What if an unsent letter, hidden in a drawer, sealed with fear, written as a final message, holds the truth revealed too late? The last words that could have changed a life. Tonight, you're not just watching a video, you're stepping into a true emotional story about forgiveness and regret, a secret letter that turns silence into a voice, a goodbye that tries to become closure. If you can handle listening until the end, this letter might heal you too. Imagine a quiet hospital room, the steady beep of a monitor, the cold light against the warm glow of sunset through the blinds. A daughter stands beside a father who ran out of time for the conversation they both needed. He never found the courage to speak. Instead, he left a confession on paper, an apology unspoken, an unsent letter, a fragile bridge back to her. This isn't drama. It's what real families live with. Words left unsaid, a truth revealed when the clock is almost out, the chance for forgiveness arriving in ink. Stay with me. Your attention here is not just a view, it is witness. You came for a story, but you may find your own reflection in it. Grief and love, distance and reconciliation, the ache of, "I should have said it sooner." We talk about last words like they are grand speeches. Most of the time, they are ordinary sentences carrying extraordinary weight. "I was afraid. I should have been there. I loved you." In letters never delivered, we honor that weight. We don't sensationalize, we humanize. We open sealed envelopes so the silence finally has somewhere to go. Here is what you can expect. Truth revealed, not teased. An emotional letter read aloud, line by line, the way it was meant to be heard. A story about a father and daughter that becomes a story about all of us. Forgiveness that doesn't erase the past, but changes the future. And yes, a promise. If you stay to the final line, if you listen without looking away, you will understand why this letter, though not written for you, may heal a part of you that has been waiting for closure. That is not hype. That is the power of a confession finally spoken. You will hear the language of real life. Regret, apology, grief, goodbye, second chance, redemption. You will feel the tension between protection and absence, between "I didn't know how" and "I needed you anyway." You will see how a secret held too long becomes heavier than the truth itself. And as we move through each sentence, you will find moments that sound like your story, the birthday missed, the conversation delayed, the hug never given, the call you meant to make. I'm asking something simple. Breathe, listen, and hold your judgment until the end. If this letter touches a part of your life, if it echoes your relationship with a parent, a child, a friend, hold that recognition. At the end, if it's right, tell me, "I understand." Share this with someone who needs a sign. For now, keep your focus on the page and let the words do what silence could not. The algorithm may not know your heart, but the heart recognizes itself when it hears the truth. The envelope is creased at the corners. The paper smells like old books and hospital soap. Her hands are steady, but her breath is not. She unfolds the letter her father left, the one he never dared to deliver, and finds the first line, waiting like a door he finally opened. She reads the date, sees her name, and then the sentence that begins to change everything. Before we go any further, subscribe to Unsent Letters and turn on the bell, because here every story is more than words. It's a chance to heal, to see yourself, and to discover what was left unsaid. Stay with us until the end. She found the letter in a drawer he had always kept locked, a place she had never dared to open until that night. The old wood creaked as if it carried the weight of years of silence, and tucked inside was an envelope that seemed too fragile to hold the truth it contained. The man who had written it was lying just down the hall, his body fragile, his breath shallow, the machines surrounding him announcing each passing second with a steady, unrelenting beep. He had never found the courage to say the words face to face, never spoken aloud the apologies, the regrets, the hidden feelings that had shaped an entire life. For years, she believed he simply did not care. She believed his absence was proof of indifference, that the silence between them was emptiness. Yet here she stood, holding the weight of a confession that had remained hidden, waiting for the moment when it might finally be read. The hospital smelled of disinfectant, but underneath it lingered the faint trace of his cologne, almost forgotten, like a memory trying to return. She felt her hands tremble as she held the paper, because in that instant she knew this was not just an unsent letter. It was his last words, his final message, the truth revealed too late. Outside the window, the city kept moving, but inside that room, time seemed frozen, every sound exaggerated. The clicking of her shoes on the floor, the shallow rasp of his breathing, the silence between heartbeats. Everything conspired to remind her that this moment would not come again. She remembered birthdays he never attended, milestones he missed, times when his absence felt louder than any presence could have. She had built her story around that silence, convincing herself that he was simply a man who chose distance over love. But as her eyes traced the handwriting, the ink faded by time. Something inside her shifted. It was not indifference that had shaped him. It was fear, weakness, perhaps even shame. And the truth of that realization hit harder than the anger she had carried for so long. This was not the story she had believed. This was not the father she had known. Her breath caught as she thought about what it meant to read words left unsaid for decades. It was not just paper. It was a voice finally speaking. It was a chance, however late, for forgiveness. It was a reminder that silence carries its own message, and that regret can weigh heavier than words ever spoken. She had come expecting to say goodbye, to stand in grief and loss. Instead, she was being handed a secret letter, a confession that had waited too long, a mirror that forced her to see not only him, but also herself. She did not open it yet. She let the envelope rest in her hands, feeling the texture of the paper, the sharp edge of a truth she was both afraid and desperate to uncover. The monitors in the room marked each passing second, reminding her that this choice, whether to read, whether to know, whether to forgive, was now. The air felt heavy, charged, as though the entire room was holding its breath with her. This was not just a story of absence. It was a story of a father who had run out of time and a daughter who had to decide if she was willing to listen. And as she slid her finger beneath the flap of the envelope, the world seemed to narrow to a single point, the first line waiting to be revealed. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter, the paper thin and fragile, almost as if it could dissolve under the weight of her tears. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the kind of script that comes from someone who has carried too much inside for too long. And then she saw the first words, and they were nothing like what she had expected. Daughter, I don't know if I still have time to say this, but you need to know that I was always watching over you, even in silence. I failed you, and the silence was my greatest mistake. The words struck her with a force that made her chest tighten, as though the air had been pulled from the room. For years, she had convinced herself that his absence was indifference, that the father who missed birthdays, who missed school plays, who missed every milestone, simply did not care. Yet here it was, written in black and white. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was fear. The absence wasn't neglect, it was weakness. How do you process something like that? How do you reconcile decades of hurt with the possibility that what you believed was a lack of love was in fact a lack of courage? She felt her hands shake as she read the lines again, her eyes blurring with tears. All those nights she cried herself to sleep thinking she wasn't enough, all the moments she stood in a crowd searching for a father who never came, all the anger she carried. It was now tangled with something else, a flicker of understanding. Because in those few sentences, she heard something she had never heard from him before. Vulnerability, regret, an apology too late, but still an apology. It is almost impossible to explain the way those words land when you have carried the weight of absence for a lifetime. They pierce and they heal at the same time. They open wounds and close them in the same breath. She wanted to scream at him, demand why he hadn't said this years ago, when it could have made a difference, when it could have changed the way she looked at herself. But at the same time, she wanted to hold on to the letter and never let it go, because finally, she had proof that she was not invisible, that she had always mattered, even if he hadn't known how to show it. And maybe this is where you, listening now, begin to feel something stir inside your own story. Maybe you too know what it's like to carry unspoken words, to live with regret, to wonder what was left unsaid by someone you loved. Maybe you have your own unsent letter, a goodbye that never came, a silence that shaped you. If any of this feels familiar, if even one line echoes the pain or the longing in your own life, I want you to pause for a moment and write in the comments, "I understand." Because these stories are not just mine to tell or hers to live. They belong to all of us who have known absence, regret, forgiveness delayed. When you write those words, you are not only acknowledging your story, you are letting someone else see that they are not alone in theirs. Her hands tightened on the letter as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. The machines continued their rhythm, marking every second, every beat, every breath her father might not have tomorrow. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't just reading his last words. She was confronting everything she had believed about him, about herself, about love withheld and love finally revealed. And as her eyes moved to the next line, she braced herself, because she knew this was only the beginning of what he had to say, and she was not sure her heart was ready for it. As her eyes traced the next lines, she felt her breath hitch, her throat tightening, as if her body already knew the weight of what she was about to read. The words blurred for a moment before coming into focus, and each one landed with the kind of force that can break you and rebuild you in the same instant. I was there at every one of your birthdays, but hidden, too afraid to knock on the door. I watched you grow. I saw your strength. But I never found the courage to tell you that what I felt was pride and love. I loved you in silence, and now that silence is killing me. The sentence lingered in the air, like a confession whispered in a church, heavy with truth, sharp with regret. She pressed the paper closer to her chest, her tears falling onto the ink, smearing the evidence of a father who had always been near, but never present. The picture began to change in her mind. Every year she thought he had forgotten. He had actually been there, a shadow watching from across the street, a figure hidden at the edge of the crowd. Every achievement she thought meant nothing to him had in fact been seen, witnessed quietly, though never acknowledged. And that truth was almost harder to bear than the belief that he hadn't cared at all. Because indifference is cold, but cowardice. It means the love was there all along, suffocated by fear, locked away like the letter in her hand. She remembered her 16th birthday, the way she looked out the window hoping he might appear, and how she told herself she was foolish to expect it. Now she wondered if he had been parked down the street, watching, his hands gripping the steering wheel, desperate to get out, too paralyzed to face her. She thought of her graduation, standing in the crowd of students, scanning the audience, and seeing only emptiness where he should have been. Was he there too, hidden in the back, clapping silently, convincing himself that invisibility was enough? The thought tore at her. Every memory she had carried as abandonment was now reshaped as silent presence, and the shift made her heart ache in ways she had never known. Her tears ran freely now, and she let them. Because this was no longer just a story about absence. It was about presence denied, love disguised as distance, a man who had chosen the prison of silence instead of the risk of rejection. And suddenly, she understood why he called it his greatest mistake. Silence had not protected her. Silence had stolen from her. Silence had carved holes in her life that no words could fully repair. Yet in this moment, she was being given those words, too late but not meaningless, written with trembling hands and a heart finally stripped of its excuses. If you are listening to this and hearing echoes of your own life, maybe of a parent who never said the words, or a friend who disappeared without explanation, or a love that stayed unspoken, you know this pain. You know what it is to crave words left unsaid, to long for closure that never arrived. And as you listen, remember this: silence is not emptiness. Silence often hides the deepest truths, the ones people are too afraid to give voice to. And if you have ever lived in that silence, you are not alone. She held the letter tighter, her vision blurred, her body trembling with the collision of grief and revelation. These sentences were not just his last words, they were the undoing of everything she had believed about her childhood, about her worth, about what it meant to be loved. And as her eyes moved to the next lines, she felt her heart brace for what was coming, because she knew the confession was not yet finished, and what remained could break her even more. When she reached the last line, her hands were trembling so badly she could hardly hold the paper. She had read every word, every confession, every regret carved into shaky handwriting, and yet she still wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel. Should she be angry for the years stolen from her, the birthdays spent waiting, the milestones shadowed by silence? Or should she feel peace, knowing at last that she had always been loved, even if fear had kept that love locked away? The truth is, she felt both: rage and relief, pain and healing, loss and forgiveness, all colliding in her chest until it was impossible to separate them. That is the burden of last words, of unsent letters, of truth revealed when time is already gone. She folded the paper slowly, her tears dripping onto the creases as though sealing it all over again. She looked at the man in the bed, her father, frail and motionless, the steady rhythm of the monitor, the only proof that life still lingered. That night, he would take his last breath, and she knew it. He would leave with no more chances to speak, no more chances to explain. But somehow, through this letter, he had already said more than he had in a lifetime. His absence had always been louder than any words, but in the end, his words became louder than the silence. What she carried out of that room was not closure in the perfect sense. Closure is rarely perfect. What she carried was a shift, a new truth. She was not forgotten, she was not invisible, and love had always been there even when fear buried it. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became something she could hold without it destroying her. And that is what a letter can do. That is why unsent letters, final messages, last words matter, because even when they arrive too late, they still have the power to heal, to release, to change the way we see ourselves and those we thought had failed us. And maybe, as you listen to this story, you feel something stirring in you too. Maybe this was not your father, but someone else, a parent, a friend, a partner, who left you with silence instead of words. Maybe you also carry questions, regrets, or an ache that still lingers because of what was never said. And maybe hearing this confession reminds you that silence is never empty. It always holds meaning. Sometimes it is fear, sometimes it is love, sometimes it is regret. If this story reached you, let it remind you that even unspoken words can be transformed into healing if you are willing to hear them. This letter was not written for you, but maybe it became exactly what you needed today. If even one sentence touched a wound you've been carrying, if even one line felt like it belonged to your own story, don't keep that to yourself. Write in the comments, "I understand," or simply tell me what silence has cost you. Because the more we share, the more we see that none of us are as alone in our pain as we think we are. And remember, this is not the end, because every letter holds another story. Tomorrow, I will read the letter of a mother who kept a secret for over 20 years, a truth she never revealed until after her death, a secret that changed everything for the ones she left behind. You cannot miss that story, so stay here with me, be part of this journey, and prepare yourself for what comes next, because sometimes the words we never expected are the ones that change us the most. If this letter spoke to your heart, don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe to Unsent Letters and share it with someone who needs to hear these words. And when you're ready, write in the comments, "I understand," because every word left unsaid can still become healing for you and for someone you love. And remember, the next letter may be even more painful and even more transformative.